Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to part 2 of our conversation with the great Mike Hayes. The haunting guitar sounds that you've just heard as part of the theme music to the Music Mind podcast series actually come from the hands of our guest, Mike Hayes. The music comes from the introduction of an instrumental tune that Mike and I wrote and recorded here at the B&M studios back in the 1980s. It was a watershed tune for us because the music was released under contract by a Los Angeles-based recording firm right across the USA, released as a single that achieved enough radio airplay and notice to qualify for the official ballot of the 31st Annual Grammy Awards. An amazing achievement for two kids from the bush in regional Queensland, Australia. Let's pick up our conversation with Mike now, where he was retelling his memories of some of his earliest public performances. So our next serious performance gig was actually an interesting one, and we'll throw a photo up of this. This is Mike and I playing at the Yamaha Organ Festival at the largest hall in the area at that time. We were playing to 1,500 people, which was a massive crowd in a town the size of Gympie. The place was packed to the rafters. What do you remember, Mike, about that performance?
Well, totally different. We had a bigger amp for a start.
60 watt.
Yeah.
A 60 watt Yamaha amp shared by the two.
Still two guitars.
Still two guitars. But I agree. And it was indoors.
Indoors.
Yeah.
And in that hall, the way it was designed, you didn't need a lot of power. You actually didn't. And even though there's a lot of people in there, it was great because you could actually hear what you were playing. I enjoyed it. It was sort of quite terrifying in that at that stage with the number of people when you looked out, but I just concentrated. I was reading the notes and that.
And it's interesting, do you remember what we played, the songs we played in that performance? I think we played 3.
Yep, Strutting with Maria was one.
Which is a Herb Albert tune.
Yeah.
And
right.
Proud Mary by one of our heroes, John Fogerty from Creedence. And I think the third one was a bit of a throwaway pop hit of the time, Freedom Come, Freedom Go.
Yep.
Which was,
and we threw it away.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, my memory of that is, I go back to that little photo of Mike at 2 years old. Put me in, coach, I'm ready to play. I can remember standing next to this guy, and I don't know how old we were at that stage. You would still be at school, would you? Still at school. We're playing electric guitars. We're only playing the tempo guitars, I believe, the tempo guitars through the Yamaha amp. But I always felt really confident that, the coach has put him in. He's ready to play. So this is an interesting thing too, that when we were growing up, you were exclusively the lead player, and I was the rhythm player. And I just want to talk about that for a moment, because from a guitar player's point of view, did that cause you some trouble down the track, that for many years you never really got to play rhythm? You were the star player.
Absolutely. And
let's talk about that for a bit.
The funny side of that is, the thing I really like to do is play rhythm.
There you go.
I really do like to play rhythm.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. That's home. I can play solos, but the thing that I really love doing is accompanying people.
Yeah. Things happen very quickly for you, that you left school, I think, at age 15, which everyone did at that time. Were you 15?
Well, yeah, the funny thing was, I'd be at school, and I'd come home, and Mum would be saying, they want you down the music shop. They'd actually book this in, because the people in the music shops at that stage didn't have anyone on staff that could demonstrate, and then they were starting to bring in electric guitars and amps and that. So I'd get these bookings, basically. I'd come home from school, and instead of doing homework, which should have been
was of no real interest.
No, actually, and so you get to come down and demonstrate the amps and that. And I remember one day in particular, this amp was, I think, $500 or something. I had no idea, because they'd be the new model Yamaha or whatever it was. And I'll never forget one day I went in and demonstrated the amp for one of the customers, and the lady who owned the shop said, "Oh, Mike, can you just wait for a minute?" And I thought, "Oh no, he's something." So I was just going to basically go home and head off. But she said, so I was up looking at the counter, just looking at the picks and that, which is about the only thing I could really afford at that stage.
Yeah.
And she went up to, I'll never forget this, she went up to the till, opened up and gave me $100. Yeah, people would work the entire week for not that amount of money. And it was just seemed like nothing to me. And I thought, well, what's going on here? And I remember showing Dad, and he said, well, you better give it back. Like, you know, not knowing how this actually happened. Well, yeah. And the thing about it is that it opened up the ideas that maybe all these things about playing guitar is not so silly after all. I mean, I was determined to keep doing it. I had no idea how that was going to happen. I remember from my little dream world saying, this is what I'm going to do.
Yes.
But reality kicks in too, and you're going to say, but how are you going to eat? And when this happened, that didn't happen very often, but that amp, whatever the commission was, they must have gave me whatever, obviously more than 10% there.
Yeah.
But I would regularly pick up income from selling instruments for the music shops before I ever left school. So there was no question. By the time I left school, I had the two music shop people vying for me to work in one of the shops.
Folks, the important thing there is that we've already learned that Mike played his first note on a guitar ever on his 13th birthday. He left school at 15, and I think he walked straight into a job at 15. Yeah. So within 2 years, this guy had developed his playing to the standard where he was offered a full-time job, essentially as an instrument demonstrator, I imagine, in those days. Was it, or what was your role?
It was basically as a teacher, and this is where I have to say another word about Bunny, a very generous person. He actually put in a good word. Now, remember, he was actually teaching from his own studio at home for some of these music stores. That's how he made his income. But he put in a good word for me, which would actually, no doubt, have affected his income. So he was putting my interest before his, to be perfectly honest, and that happened so many times with Bunny that it was definitely going to affect his income. But through his recommendation, as well as just, you know, my own reputation that developed from playing, as in you.
Well, we were playing
all the time.
Yeah, we were playing to 1,500 people, staring at the music stand and.
Yes.
You know, it's about as entertaining, I suppose, as watching grass grow. But I remember people would come up to us and said, you guys were the best thing on it that night. There was an international lady, a very good organ player from Japan.
Yuri Nishimura.
Yes, she was a fantastic player, and she was demonstrating the very latest, top-of-the-line Yamaha electronic organ. Great player. But so many people would say that we were the stars of the night, and you know, like, I know that's nice to see two little kids up there, local kids, fighting it with the international player. But I think that audience of 1,500 people probably fueled recognition for you. I'm just amazed that in a space of 2 years, from touching an instrument for the first time, you become the town of Gympie's #1 top guitar teacher without any question of a doubt. I remember, you know, I remember living in Gympie, and you could barely walk down the street without running into someone who had learnt guitar from Mike Hayes or knew someone who had. I don't know how many people you must have taught over the years, but it's got to be in the thousands of people.
Most likely,
and it's a real credit to you to be able to self-learn, direct your education to get enough skill, and of course you've continued to learning to more about your love of music and the guitar to this day. I just want to talk more about performing. So we also performed away from Gympie. So we were playing in local dance bands and various different combinations, and a shout out to Doug Hewitt and Terry Eaton. If you're watching, Doug, we had a lot of fun with Doug and Terry. Doug played the Yamaha organ and Terry played the drums. We played with that band for many, many years, playing at dances, and had more laughs than you could ever imagine. The music we weren't that serious. The crowd used to think we were having a ton of fun, but we were basically taking the mickey out of sitting there at 2 a.m. in a freezing cold country long flat hall playing Toot Toot Tootsie Bye Bye or Bye Bye Blues. We could sort of see the funny side of it as if this is not where Mike and Brian wanted to go. I don't know about Doug and Terry. They were sort of in it for the ride. Yeah. But we also played in different groups with Bob Tryhorn, who owns the local music store and has owned it outright for about 25 years and done a fantastic job of keeping a regional music store alive. And I remember Bob worked with me at the time, and I said to him one day, "Would you like to play bass?" "Oh, well, no, what's that?" Bob sort of said. And Bob became our resident bass player, and we played at a lot of gigs. And we'll just throw up a few photos of these people in our early days here while we're talking. We also started to travel. We're always looking at beyond the small town we were living. I remember we started to travel to the Sunshine Coast, and we met a great guy there, a good drummer, Ross McDonald.
Ross.
And with Bob and Ross, we did a recording, a cassette album, one of our, well, not our first recording, but what is really significant about that album, it was called Night Flight. What's significant is the 10 songs that were on that cassette album were all written by you and me.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you remember, do you have some memories of recording Night Flight?
Yeah.
And again, for legal reasons, let's not go into too many details, but what are some of the moments that you can remember?
Well, there was always interesting moments when you'd be sort of halfway through a recording and then you'd have to stop because the phone would ring or something. And
But look, it was a monumental moment to write and arrange and record 10 original songs. But we also started to play with other players, and we're going to talk about your arranging moments. And I remember being blown away with your ability to put on paper sounds of different instruments, and you studied that, and we will get to that. But we started playing in a big band on the Sunshine Coast, and there were some good players in that band. The one I can remember the most was a guy called Henry Bowyer, and he was the lead trumpet player. And I remember, Mike, one day with you arranging, you did an arrangement of How High the Moon, and I remember we were sort of a bit cheeky about this because we were listening at home to Doc Severinsen and Irby Green and some of the greatest players around. And for some unknown reason, you decided you would test the lead trumpet player's ability and wrote a G above high C as an extended long note with a pause sign over it at the end. And I can remember you discussing with Henry the overall chart. And Henry came from a full-time military band background, and if you saw him, he's straight out of the Count Basie trumpet section. He had the ideal build and embouchure for a trumpet player. And at the time I thought it was cheeky, but do you recall on Henry's first take through your version of How High the Moon, how the ending went?
Very loud and very clear, and I remember Henry looking over the music stand and looking at me.
As he played probably the fattest high G that I've ever heard in my life on trumpet, and proceeded to take it up to a double high C and hold on. And I think it was one of those moments where message to Mike, thanks for the chart, I'm up for it, what's next? But they're wonderful memories, and it's some of the times where we got to experience some real players that you just would never run into in downtown Gympie. This brings me to 1979, I believe, in January 79, I think, the Tamworth annual steel guitar convention. Now, what's your memories of, this was an amazing moment for us. This was a trip, a massive trip in Dad's car. Dad drove us down, and you know, I think we had 2 amps in the back and a pedal steel guitar and a guitar. And so I don't know, somewhere we must have had a towel and a pair of underpants or something. We had so much music here. What's some of your memories? What's your memory of, we played at the Tamworth RSL Club on the Saturday afternoon, and we've got a photo of this. Look, some of these photos, folks, are blurred. They were done on the original old self-developing Polaroid things, which seemed to be a good idea in the 70s, long before the digital, and they've, you know, unfortunately, this is the best we've got. But there's a photo here, Mike, of you and me in our Emmons steel guitar T-shirts. Who were we playing for at the RSL club on the Saturday afternoon?
Oh, well, people like Tommy Emmanuel.
Tommy Emmanuel
Front row.
and Jerry Bird.
Jerry Bird, yes.
And you still think, what were we thinking? I had only just left school, and I'd been playing the steel probably for maybe 3 years.
Yep.
And here I am,
Yep.
The cheek of youth, Mike and I standing there performing to probably the greatest lap steel player of all time, certainly recognised as an amazing player. Jerry played for the steel guitar, all the steel guitar for Elvis Presley, the Blue Hawaii movies, the original steel for Hank Williams Sr. and Bing Crosby, all of the major stars. And we were playing, 15 feet from him.
Yeah.
And I was showing the world what I didn't know about the pedal steel, and Mike was doing an incredible job of backing me up. But the interesting thing, we got to shake Jerry Bird's hand there, and he was incredibly encouraging to us both. It's just amazing. That,
well, the good thing at this time for me is that I was now able to play a lot of rhythm guitar. When you started getting into steel guitar,
absolutely
great. We'd be playing hours where I'd be playing rhythm guitar, so I love it.
And just briefly there, my journey into the steel guitar was largely because Mike was such a good lead player. And there were some funny moments there that we had eventually we had exactly the same Gibson guitars, and I started playing a little bit of lead out there because I was just, quite frankly, bored out of my brain playing country dance music on rhythm guitar. But Mike had built up such a reputation as the lead player that I'd play the solo in Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, and people would come up to Mike and say, that's a fantastic
thing. They
thing.
walk straight past and congratulate me.
I'm just thinking, what have I got to do? And it's funny, the real reason I took up the steel guitar was to just get away from this guy and how good he could play the guitar. Because I thought, if I live to 100, no one is ever going to know when I'm actually playing a solo on the guitar. So it is interesting that it gave you the chance to be the rhythm player. We sort of swapped roles. On the Sunday, which was the actual steel guitar convention, and we'll put some photos up here. Mike was one of the only two people who prepared charts for the players to play. They were the top players in Australia were at this steel guitar convention, professional session drummers and bass players. And Mike took the trouble to write out charts for the drummer and the bass player. He had memorised his own parts, and of course on steel I was just playing by ear. And we've got a photo there where Lou Farina's on drums. I can't remember the bass player's name. I don't know whether you do, Mike, but a great bass player. Apologies to the bass player. And you can see that the bass and drummer are staring at the charts that Mike prepared. The only other person who brought charts to the steel guitar convention was Jerry Bird.
That's right. And incidentally, the guitar player that was playing the charts with Jerry Bird is a guy called Jan Gold, who actually is on the Don Andrews records. Don used to put out records where they have arrangements of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, whatever, that you could have a rhythm section and a lead solo section, and you could go out and play gigs, and Jan's the guitar player there, so that went to the reading.
And we've got a photo there of Jerry Bird playing again. Look, apologies for the quality of these photos, but that was Jerry on the same stage. We were sort of part of the warm-up act. Now, my memory, Mike, of this was, there's a photo of me playing the steel there and of you backing me up. My memory was in the front row, and it was held at a restaurant in Tamworth. So there was probably 150 people there. It was quite a very select crew. But on the front row, I do recall a now very famous guitar player called Tommy Emmanuel sitting only a few seats away from Jerry Bird. So here we are, two kids from Gympie, me just out of school, and it was recorded. And for those of you who want to search out there, Steel Guitars of Australia Live, you might be able to get a copy. We'll throw a photo of it up there, and we got 2 tracks on that album. And I also want to acknowledge, I'm sure you do too, Mike, Norm Bodkin.
Absolutely.
We'll put a photo up here of Norm getting his handprint in the Walk of Fame in Tamworth. But Norm absolutely believed in us. He invited us to come and play at that convention. We never would have got there if Norm didn't invite us. And not only that, 2 years before that, in 1977, and we'll also put a photo up of this, you and I recorded our first recording, a single which had the Leo Sayers "You Make Me Feel Like Dancing" on one side, and "It's Going to Take Some Time," which is quite prolific when you think about it, or prophetic, whatever you want to call it at the time. The things I remember about that is the guy that produced the album spelt Mike as M-I-C-K, so this is Mick Hayes at the time.
That's close.
And also that the pressing was slightly out of round, so that towards the end of either song, the music.
I think it was a phase effect.
The music would ebb and flow, which is a little disappointing. However, we sent that single to Norm Bodkins, and he played that on a national radio show that he hosted every Sunday night called Steel and Time. And do you remember the first time we heard ourselves on radio?
It sounded really great.
It sounded good.
When you hear it back through the speakers, and then you start to get the idea of the music scene from both sides of the glass, so to speak. It's always been a mystery. You'd hear the Monkees or whoever we're listening to coming through the speakers. When you hear your own music or your own work coming through the same speakers, it puts a different twist on it. Yeah.
And when the Steel Guitars of Australia album was released, we had two songs on that. One was "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," and the other was from Fiddler on the Roof, "If I Were a Rich Man." So it's interesting that we were playing, I guess, commercial songs where the general thing in the steel guitar world was that you played Hawaiian music or country music.
Yes.
And I do remember Tommy Emmanuel just before... this was in the era where he was just starting to develop his acoustic guitar playing, solo playing. And do you remember him playing Dixie McGuire?
I'll never forget that.
Yep.
Tommy was just playing, as he always has, but astoundingly well. And again, the good thing is we were sitting not too far away from front row seat. And
Tommy, I know you won't have remembered that, but we certainly remembered playing for you. And we've both sat in your audience many times, and we wish you all the best, mate.
Fantastic.
A year after we played that, Tommy released a fantastic sort of direct-to-disc album with the steel guitar player, the late steel guitar player, Pee Wee Clark, called From Out of Nowhere.
Terrific.
The other day I had a listen. There is a copy of that up on YouTube. Amazing. And I just listened back. You could sort of hear where Tommy was heading with his technique on the acoustic guitar. So that was, what's some other performances, mate, that stick out in your mind? That was a magic trip there, but are there other performances that you'd like to recollect now, and anything about them?
Well, I mean, there's been many different performances that have really... every performance teaches you something. One that really sticks in my mind was playing at the Hilton Hotel in Sydney with a whole stellar team of top flight jazz people, and George Goller and Bob Bernard, Lenny Bernard, Ed Gaston, all these people. What I'll never forget about this is that I remember writing this chart, a particular chart, and I handed it to George backstage just before we're coming on. So I handed it to George, and he looks through it like this, and then shuts the book and hands it back to me. I thought, oh my God,
you've offended him.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
Then I didn't think anything more of it. I'm thinking but everybody else held their charts. They hanged on to their charts. We went back to the start.
Yep.
And next thing I look around, and it's playing it, and it's sounding really good. I was having a great time. I thought, gee, this sounds really good. I look over my shoulder, and George is just looking back at me, but there's no chart. He memorised the entire chart in one glance.
So, folks, George Goller is one of the greatest musicians ever.
Yep.
He spent more than 40 years willowing his way around Australia, to all parts of Australia, to the most remotest parts of Australia, with the great Don Burrows. Don and George, just extraordinary. And we actually do a tribute later in this podcast, our tribute to Don and George. We've got some photos there, Mike, of you with George Goller, and also Bob Bernard. Bob Bernard's just an amazing trumpet player. He had an album called, I think, Music to Midnight. Here in Australia on ABC Radio, the national broadcaster, I think again it might have been a Sunday night, there was a program called Music to Midnight, and Bob, just the most lyrical player that you'd ever hear on the cornet or the trumpet. It was such an honour to be on the stage with players of that standard. Okay, Mike, what's your first memory of recording your own playing? But before you answer that, let's have a look at a clip here of you playing an amazing solo in a jazz context on your George Benson Ibanez guitar. What's your first memory, you personally, of recording yourself, playing the guitar?
Well, it was on a cassette player that we had, and I really liked the sound. It was actually recording at Bunny's place for a start. It was actually, we'd take the cassette player around there, and I had recordings of me playing the guitar along with Bunny, and every time I'd learn something, I'd think, I'm a little bit ahead and a little bit behind. I'd always be thinking about how you could make it better. But I love the idea of recording because it had a permanency to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember, I still remember the night Dad bought the first, I was going to say the first cassette player ever made. It certainly looked like it. But there was an amazing meeting of the family around the kitchen table when Dad learned how to hit play and record on the cassette player, and we heard our voices back.
Yeah.
Talk about man landing on the moon, mate. Yeah. This was like, how good is this?
Yep.
But I also remember you and me, I feel sorry for Dad. I don't know who he bought the cassette player for, but we just, pirated. We just grabbed
it.
He never saw it. And somehow or other, I don't know whether you remember this, we found a way, if we half held the record button, we could double track on a mono cassette deck.
I'm not sure how we did that. I've often wondered how we did that.
I to this day, we were recording some amazing double tracking on a mono cassette deck by just half holding down.
I do remember something about a matchstick. I don't know whether
there was something, but I just think so. Thank you, Dad, for getting the cassette player. But
absolutely.
Going back to the music mind, how important is it, do you think, for a musician to regularly record themselves?
Oh, it's absolutely imperative. You don't know. There's that old saying, if you knew you were creating when you're creating, you wouldn't be creating. Now, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Jeez, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, I know. Right. But it's important because, like, when you're busy playing, you're so into it, you don't even know how you sound.
Yeah.
And so when you get to hear it back later on without the instrument in your hand, and I would have to say the big trick would be, if you're recording something, for goodness sake, don't hit the delete button. Give yourself 2 or 3 days, because there's a tendency to keep thinking that everything we do is not good enough. I've seen many good recordings where it's been a great take by other people. I've been sitting doing backup work, and they'll go over and rub over it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So if you're taping yourself, I would definitely do that. It's like having a portfolio. If you're a model, you can go back and hear your progress, and you can hear your whole style developing. I mean, a lot of times people try and work out how Tommy Emmanuel plays or whoever, but the thing is, you want to spend time working out what you're doing and take out the good bits. Take the good bits and build on that.
I think that's so true. I just think it's invaluable. Whether you like what you hear back or not, I remember the first times, I don't know about you, but the first time we went from the cassette deck to I think the TAC 4-track machine.
That was the little
4-track. We moved to a Fostex 8-track multi-track recorder, which was 8 tracks on 1/4-inch tape.
Yeah.
We had that for a period, and eventually we moved up to the Fostex B16, a 16-track recorder. Really amazing thing. Mike now has that, and we'll just throw up a couple of photos of that recorder. A lot of the music you've heard here today was recorded on that Fostex machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, I want to listen to a track now. The other thing I was going to say, Mike, where you said it's important not to hit delete. I think it's fair to say that we've really enjoyed putting this podcast together. We've heard music that we forgot we even played.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when you sent around the Fat Cat thing, I thought, God, I could remember it, but you know, for $1 million, if someone had asked me, had we ever played a song called Fat Cat with a super hot guitar? So no. This song we're going to listen to now is a song called Why Not. It was from a period where we were writing a lot of music, and this is a very positive thing. You know, why not have a go? You know, why not? You know, we were sitting here in sleepy old Gympie, but we had a record collection that would rival just about any of the state libraries anywhere, with some of the best players. And I think it's important just to spend a little minute of saying the importance in your playing, and certainly in mine, of bringing in the best players from anywhere in the world into your head. Nowadays, of course, there's YouTube, there's whatever you want to do, but in our early years, it was you and me were members of a record club.
Right, we have a look at the back of these downbeat magazines and music magazines, and we look for catalogue sales.
Yeah.
Usually from America, they'd have these warehouse clearance sales, and we'd buy over absolutely truckloads. I remember having the guys at the customs office in Queensland, in Brisbane, there, thinking we were actually opening a music shop. They actually did. They were sort of like, the number of records these guys are bringing in. Yeah. The cool thing about it is we would get these records and we would do blindfold tests. So it's one thing owning records or books or whatever it is you've got, but you've got to actually spend the time. We would spend hours doing blindfold tests, which would essentially be we'd play a record and the other person would have to answer the name of the song, who was the lead player, and eventually bass. Who was playing bass. We knew our record collection so well.
That was Ray Brown and not Major Holly or Ron Carter on bass. We got to the point
on drums.
We had a lot of fun, and I actually say that to some of my better students, particularly if you're in a family situation where there's more than one musician in the house. Yep. It's the best thing you can do. You know, develop your hearing to the point where you can identify those players by their sounds, and it's a credit to the players when you can.
Yes.
You know, that's Irby Green on trombone. There's no doubt that's Irby. You know. So don't delete things. Record things, don't delete them. Bring sounds into your head. Have a listen to the introduction here from a song that I'd forgotten we had even recorded, called Why Not. This is Mike back in the era of the Fat Cat era. He's playing the Bill Lawrence guitar. Have a listen how melodic the electric guitar is in this introduction. So again, a really unique contemporary sound there from Mike in that solo. You've got your George Benson Ibanez. Mike, tell us the story of, you know, you evolved from a tempo acoustic guitar to a tempo 335 sort of copy guitar to a genuine Gibson USA 335 guitar. But at a certain point, you hopped camps from Gibson to Ibanez. Can you tell us a bit of the background? Because this guitar's been associated with you now for a very long time. Just tell us a bit about that story.
Yes, at the time I had the Gibson guitar. It needed some repair that I didn't really realise at the time, because we were doing a lot of recording and there was some intonation problems. And through that, I was recommended to see a guitar repair guy called Chris Kinman, and Chris Kinman was very famous for rewinding pickups and a very, very important guitar repair person in Brisbane. And alongside of Chris Kinman was a guitar repair guy called Chris Melville. And Chris Melville I've had an association with for many, many years, and has helped restore this guitar just through sheer playing over the years. It basically deteriorated to a stage it needed to be like a total restoration project. And at the time in Brisbane, when I was looking for a new guitar, there was three George Benson Ibanez. This is original issue GB10 Ibanez guitar. And there was 3. One, the pickup didn't really work on, and so I couldn't really hear it. But as I picked up these guitars, this guitar spoke to me. And I think that's the thing when you're looking at an instrument. An instrument basically should be something that is almost invisible. It really, you shouldn't be worried about fighting the instrument or anything like that. It should just let all the music you're hearing in your head, let it breathe and let it come out. So this instrument was the one I chose out of the 3. And at the time I took it out to a band practice that afternoon, and the feedback was phenomenal. It just howled like mad. I couldn't control it. So what happened is the original bridge, the George Benson, when it comes out, has a wooden bridge, and in a jazz situation, if you're playing very softly, that doesn't cause any feedback problems. But with the wooden bridge, it was very resonant, and I had feedback problems like crazy. So I decided to put a Les Paul bridge on the top here, which turned out to be a good idea. I didn't do a good job of it, but eventually, with Chris's help, we maintained that as a modification that I've kept.
Yeah, and it certainly, I got the chance to play this guitar the other day, and I was really surprised. Mike's got very heavy strings on there, and they're also flat wound strings. But on that guitar, they're the perfect combination. You know, I think it's a .013 on the first string, which I thought, you know, this is going to be impossible to sort of...
It's 13 to 56.
13 to 56, so that's a pretty heavy sort of set. And the flat wound, how long have you been playing the flat wound strings?
I originally had flat wounds on the tempo guitar when they came through, and I thought they were a bit dull, but because at that stage I was trying to get like a country sound, because we were playing country dances, and that had influenced the type of tone I wanted to get out of the guitar. I've been back playing flat wounds for probably about 10 years, and that mostly come about from, I went through a whole period where I did a lot of solo guitar work, out and did concerts just with one guitar, and I didn't want the string noise to interfere with the music. It was just one guitar. But I had the same type gauge in round wounds, 13 to 56. I played it on this guitar for a long time, but this is the setup I'm really happy with now. Yeah,
and it sounds fantastic. In fact, we'll have a listen to Mike play a solo, one of the early recorded solos on the George Benson guitar from a track we wrote and recorded called Shadow Play. So this is, you'll hear the different character of this guitar, and it's another beautiful melodic style solo. Let's have a listen to Shadow Play. That was great, Mike, and another example of just saying a lot with very few notes. I want to move forward now to your recording engineer and producer aspect of your career. I remember you did a course in audio engineering in the early days from San Francisco. Do you want to tell us a bit about that experience and what that meant for you doing that course?
Yeah, it's really important. It was with the Audio Institute of America, and I studied with a guy called Peter Miller, who would work with a whole lot of big names in the industry, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Fleetwood Mac, all those sort of people. So it was really good information when I'd be sending back assignments, and that a lot of it was audio. In those days it was on cassette they'd send through, and you'd have to pick different instruments, and Peter was sort of amazed, because he'd send through something like say a steel guitar, and I'd tell him that it's a lap steel guitar or pedal steel guitar, and he'd be like, heck, how did you work that out? It was like a bit of a test. So it was just the whole idea of sound, and it was super important, because even though mostly playing guitar, what I really consider myself to be is a sound explorer. That's really
That's interesting. A sound explorer.
That's how I
yeah.
really view myself.
And I remember sitting at the desk over just over your shoulder there, the original Dynamix 24-channel mixer where we recorded a lot of the music that we've heard today. And there's no automation on that desk at all. No, even the fade out of a track was had to be done manually. And you and I seemed to be sitting there as if we were flying a jet airplane. Sometime there was we'd have to remember at this point we want to turn the pan. Nowadays it's hilarious. We just every aspect of the digital audio workstation nowadays is fully automated, and you can have 68 goes at did you want the panning at 1 o'clock or 1:30 left to right. But I think it taught us a lot. I think one of the instruments you play best is the actual recording desk. You've got great ears, and it's acknowledged some of the quotes that we've seen up on the screen while we're talking about this, where some of the best people in the world have said you've got great ears and the ability to create good sounds not only on the instrument but from the mixing desk. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that? Do you see it as an instrument? How do you see nowadays it's all on computers, but how do you see the role of your association with mixing and recording?
Well, it's just like you're painting, only you're painting in sound. So it's like you said before about you hear this song and alto flute would be the best choice there. So to me, I'm just painting in sound. I'm trying to get the image the end result that you've got in your mind. I'm trying to get that across, and most of the time, really, I'm not really worried about whether it's 2 dB here and whether it may be 365 milliseconds to the left. I'm not worried about that. I'm just, are we there yet? Have we got the sound that I'm shooting for?
Mate, I want to move forward now to when you got really serious about the guitar and your studies with Bruce Clark, the late, great Bruce Clark from Melbourne. And look, we'll just put up, before we do this, I'll put up a photo of you with Bruce in Bruce's home in Melbourne. I remember being there. I think I took that photo.
Yes, you did.
And let's just have a listen to Bruce give you a wonderful compliment, an audio compliment about what he thought about you when he was working with you. We'll just play that now.
Hi there, this is Bruce Clark. I'm a Melbourne, Australian guitarist musician. For many years I ruled the roost on the Aussie jazz guitar scene, particularly in the field of radio, television and studio recording. And for the last 20 years of a long 60-year career, I've been involved in teaching. Over the years I worked with the best, all the big names, particularly on guitar: Joe Pass, Barney Kessel, Herb Ellis, Charlie Bird, Martin Taylor, John Williams, great jazz musicians like Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, Frank Sinatra. Over the long years, I've seen and heard thousands of guitar players, guitarists of all shapes, sizes, colours and styles, but sad to say, I only heard a smattering that really knew what they were doing. So I'm here to say a few words in support of one of the keenest, caring, most thoughtful player-teachers to enter my world, and I speak of Mike Hayes. Apart from being a very accomplished performer, Mike has all of the teaching skills, and most importantly of all, he has the ability to pass them on. A motto that stood me in good stead throughout my life has been, you can't learn flying from a guy who hasn't been off the ground. And I can assure you that Mike really has been off the ground. And I'm sure that you will benefit from his skills.
Mate, you should be really proud of that. Bruce Clark was absolutely one of the legends of the Australian music industry, very successful owner of a jingle workshop and played with all of the greats. Tell us about whatever you want to tell us about your experience in learning from Bruce Clark, because from my memory, that's when you really got serious about learning more about music and particularly more about the guitar.
Right, well, I always wanted to keep getting better, and I'd be always sending away for little courses from everywhere in the world, just trying to improve the quality of my thinking, really. And it came about through technology, actually, that I was able to study with Bruce. Bruce is in Melbourne, and I was able to study through the advent of, or the use of, I should say, cassettes. If it wasn't for that technology, I wouldn't have been able to advance in the way that I really wanted to. I really struck it off with Bruce because at that stage I studied a lot of different things from different people, private lessons all over the place and that, but I always felt that I wasn't getting the whole picture. I needed to go right back to square one and put the whole language of music together for me. I knew that's what I needed to do, and there was a magazine called Jam, that's the Journal of Australian Music and Musicians.
Yep.
And in that I saw an ad, so this was another incident where there was an ad. I thought, well, I'll just go and try another one. This was just in a whole line of events.
Wow.
Anyway, I remember this was a very expensive package. The normal sort of tuition things I was doing at the time, they might have been $10, $20. Anyway, you sent away for a package from Bruce and it was $50, and at that time that was a lot of money compared to the other courses.
Absolutely.
But when I opened up the package, holy dooly, there was the Berkeley book.
Yep.
There was a little tiny booklet called 6 Pieces for Guitar by George Goller.
Right.
A Don Andrews Plectrum Method No. 1.
Yep.
And a cassette with Bruce walking through the first stages of the Berkeley book. So, and as soon as I opened the Berkeley book, it started off with the very fundamentals of C scale and all the things I really wanted to nail, and you started reading chords as note clusters like you would on piano.
Yep.
But whereas a classical piano player would see these chords and play them, they wouldn't call it C chord, and they would call it D minor or E minor. They'd see it as a group of notes. So you'd actually have to go through with Bruce and write pencil and on top that this was a C chord, a C suspended a fourth or whatever. So that was the start of it, yes.
Yeah. Wow. I can definitely remember you just, head deep in those cassettes and but you studied harder there than most doctors will ever study. But I remember you were really enjoying it, really getting somewhere, and you're getting information. Here in Australia, the three big cities are in order of population: Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. But Melbourne has always been the home of live music. I think it's fair to say that I know Sydney and Melbourne will battle it out, but I think if you wanted to go somewhere, even today, to hear a whole lot of great live music, Melbourne is the city.
Absolutely.
And Bruce was at the top of the tree with jazz guitar and guitar education, and I really enjoyed. We did that trip. Probably the two greatest memories for me with interacting with Bruce Clark was the day when you went there for the lesson. We took that photo. Bruce told the story of how George Xanthos, who was the guy in Melbourne who imported pedal steel guitars into Australia. And we've got a photo of you and me with George here that we'll just put up on the screen. This was taken at the Jerry Bird Day, but Bruce is saying he's sitting there more or less in his shorts and his thongs, and he sees George coming up the driveway, but he had another person with him. Do you remember who Bruce said was with George coming up his driveway unannounced?
I recall it was Buddy Emmons.
Buddy Emmons, guys, the late great Buddy Emmons, without a doubt, the pedal steel guitarist of all time. For those of you who have an interest in the steel guitar and pedal steel, the famous brand Showbud stood for Shot Jackson and Buddy Emmons. Those two guys invented the first professional pedal steel that was available, mass produced. Buddy eventually moved on to form his own company, the Emmons Company, and for many years produced what a lot of steel players regarded as the best pedal steel. And Buddy was just an amazing steel guitarist. I can imagine Bruce talked with a little bit of a stutter, but I can remember him sort of saying, because he realised that this, and Bruce actually played some steel guitar. He was
absolutely.
He come from a steel guitar background, like a lap steel Hawaiian background.
Yes, very interesting. The situation with Bruce after he'd finished with his jingle workshop, he attended a meeting in Melbourne where they were discussing the future of music education, and he'd made some comment about it. And the next day he had a phone call from a guy who was in the Jazz Action Society, and Melbourne. He said, Bruce, here's a chance to put your money where your mouth is. There's an ad in the paper for a fellowship to go around Australia and study for 5 years of the problems in music education, and it was the Meyer Foundation. Myers were putting up the money.
Yeah, Myers is a major department retailer here in Australia. Yes.
And when he went there, basically they said to Bruce, you've got the budget, whatever you want to do, you can put bands together, you can do whatever you want to do, but you just want to go around Australia for 5 years and see how you can improve music education.
Wow.
And this is how eventually his correspondence course, which how I come in contact with him, that's how it came into existence. But and the thing that worried the guys at the Meyer Foundation, he said, I've always wanted to play saxophone. He put on records of Jerry Mulligan, and this how he wanted, but he was frustrated because he could never find anybody who could inspire him.
Yep. When
he was going to school, so he wanted to change that situation.
And just on that, I heard a podcast just the other day of George Gola. It was recorded probably 10 years ago, talking to an FM radio station on the Gold Coast, and the announcer sort of said to George, well, but George, you started on saxophone and clarinet, is that right? And George said, yes. When he had an old guitar, or his father or someone had a guitar under the bed like everyone has, but George played one or two things on it, wasn't attracted to it, and he was actually, when he came to Australia, he was a saxophone and clarinet player.
Right.
But he said he had never been interested in the guitar until he heard a really good guitar player. So in those eras, George is, just a migrant here, finding his way. He did some... he says he was a grease monkey at a service station. He also shared a bit of a career with me, that he was a local government clerk for about a year. And I spent more than 40 years in local government in Australia. So George and I share that. But some of the touring acts come over from America, and he heard, I don't know who, he didn't say who the guitar player was, but he just said, as soon as he heard it, he said, well, that's what I want to do.
Right.
And very quickly after that, within a few years, George was playing the best jazz guitar playing you ever hear with the best jazz players in Australia.
Without a doubt.
And, it's interesting, your connection with Bruce Clark and George Gola. More recently, I believe you had the opportunity to employ George, where the tables had turned, where on an album you recorded, I think in Sydney, you want to talk about where you had the opportunity to actually employ George as an arranger or player?
So with that album, what I wanted to try and do was get the texture that George had on an ABC album. I've always liked George's arrangements, and as it turns out to be, it has a lot to do with the fact that he uses a lot of trombones and things like that, which gives that lush sound. It's actually, I was trying to think of the name of the album, but it was Lush Life on the ABC, and had strings and all sorts of things on it. And so I put together the rhythm section charts for the arrangements, and George put together the brass section, or the arrangement of the horns and that over the top, and actually come out to oversee it. We didn't expect this at all. He came out to oversee it and conduct it. He wanted to see the whole thing. Really, again, just interested in the music.
And we've got a photo of George there conducting the trombone section, but what an amazing guy, what an amazing musician. Just fantastic memories there.
Just absolutely loves the music.
And you also got to play with, the top jazz drummer in Australia, unfortunately, the late Alan Turnbull. And an amazing bass player called Craig Scott.
Well, I'd have to say, so I that was an unbelievable experience on a number of occasions with Craig Scott and Alan Turnbull. The thing I remember, these are really musicians. I remember one time at one session. Now, normally, of course, when you're setting up, the drummer would be in there sort of doing sort of demolition work type of thing in the background. So I remember setting up for a particular session, and I hear this tiny little tap, tap, tap and tuning. And what I didn't realise until I heard the playback was that Alan had tuned his drums for that track, the tom-toms. It was an A-flat. I'll never forget that. And I'm thinking, holy, this sounds really good.
Well, we've got a photo of you here, Mike, with Alan and Craig.
Okay.
Let's have a listen to you playing some great jazz rhythm guitar stuff with two of the best players in the world, Craig Scott on bass and the late Alan Turnbull on drums. That's fantastic, and you can just tell the level of musicianship there is just sky high. It must have been a thrill, Mike, to spend time with those guys, George and Alan and Craig. I can see you smiling now, but I think that's what it's all about. No matter where you live, you can always travel to play with great players, and in that case, Mike travelled to Sydney from up here in Queensland. Don't be scared. I think it would be a message for the music mind. Go to where the great players are, but you actually don't have to live there to play at a professional standard. What's your thoughts on that? Do you have to live in the Nashvilles and the Los Angeleses and the Sydney or Melbournes to play at a professional standard?
No, I think it's important to challenge yourself. I mean, a lot of those projects, they were self-funded.
Yep.
Whereas you'd actually normally only hear those type of things if the ABC would put up the money for Lush Life or something like that.
Which is the national broadcaster here in
That's
Australia
right,
for our international listeners. Yeah.
So by challenging yourself, creating projects, I actually learned how to play two-note chords, and that's what I'm playing on that particular track with Alan.
Plenty of space.
Plenty of space, and it sounds very empty when you're listening to it. So something I had to really get used to. But then when you put the vocals and the horns and that over the top, that's just all you need.
Yep.
So it's creating space between the instruments. But that was my education. Pippa, my wife, and myself put up the money for that, which was our education. I must have spent probably 3 or 4 months listening to various people that I really liked and thinking, how are they getting that sound? So it's like the Lee Ritenour thing. I had no idea listening to how Lee Ritenour would get these sounds, and I had nobody to show me because nobody I knew how to do it. So it's amazing if you keep working at it and keep listening, eventually you work out how to do something in your own way. I definitely don't play like Lee Ritenour, but you find out your own version of it, and that's my own version of say Freddie Green.
It's great, mate. It's like you listen to what I love is the breathing space. I think one of the hardest things to do in music is to actually allow silence, to actually stop. And that's where we'll leave the conversation for the moment. Please be sure to come back and check out the final part 3 of this fascinating delve into the music mind of the great Mike Hayes. In part 3, you'll get to see and hear Mike perform 2 new original pieces, playing guitar live here in the studio for this podcast. And you'll also learn about the incredible entrepreneurial success that he has had in the field of online music education and online music publication. It's a fascinating conversation. We'll fade out here with Mike playing a beautiful, sparse, thoughtful solo on the electric guitar, on this Bill Lawrence guitar, on a tune that we called Call My Name.